That's the nugget right there, folks. That is the nugget. The process, the continuation of the process, and the potential is more important than the speed of saying no and moving on.
Welcome to the Golden Group NeoMarketing Podcast, a bi-weekly discussion of best practices, latest trends, and modern techniques for professional business communication, including advertising, marketing, digital channels, social media, public relations, and alternative options.
Kyle, how are you doing this morning?
Fantastic, Pritch. Good to see you. And
Better
we have to
apologize.
Everyone. Pritch wasn't on the last episode because of a technical issue, so we're super happy to have the professor back today, laying some knowledge on us this morning.
Well, I want to talk about the power of yes.
Oh, I like that.
Today.
Okay.
Tons of books on the subject, right? Lots of articles, but I think it's really important for us to think, especially as entrepreneurs, leaders in an organization, of the impact of no and the greater impact of yes. Okay, so
I like it.
That's what we're
talking about. A little dichotomy here, but it should be really interesting. And there is definitely a lot of power in understanding the process of your yes and the process of your no's.
Absolutely. So oftentimes when our employees come to us with an idea, our tendency is to say no because.
Okay.
Right?
I like that.
But there's a negative connotation, an emotional value of no that says, I don't trust you, or I don't value you, I don't value your idea. And so people shut down. They become resentful, maybe they just kind of check out.
They definitely are less likely to come back with another idea.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. It stifles creativity as well. And so the better approach is to say yes, and some people say yes and, the old improv technique, right? Start with
see where it goes from there.
And see where it goes from there. It's exactly right. We can learn a lot from improv,
sure,
in addition to being entertained, right? But I think that's really important, that the unmistakable and welcome consequence of saying yes is that people are motivated.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, they are.
They're absolutely, yes, they are.
Yes, it's very motivational. Yes, it is.
It's very motivational. So, and the other thing that yes does is that it reduces barriers.
Okay.
And invites participation.
That makes sense as well.
Right. So and especially as an entrepreneur or a new business, you've got a great idea, and you've probably got great people around you with other great ideas that can feed into that.
That's correct.
And so you want to create the environment where people are jumping in. They feel invested. You've built.
You want the buy-in, right?
Exactly. The acceptance part of that thing. So that yes does break down those barriers. And eschews the negative emotional value of no. Do you like that college word?
I do, yes. The professor, ladies and gentlemen, the professor is laying it on us today.
One of my bosses had a sign over his desk that it said, eschew obfuscation. I love that sign.
Wow.
I need to get another one like it.
Going deep.
Anyway, the second advantage of saying yes is unleashing all of that creativity.
Yes.
Right? We've talked about it.
I'm trying not to say, just repeat yes over and over again. But I agree with these ideas. I love the idea.
Because people then feel free, no matter how outlandish they think it might be or somebody else might think, you get all of those ideas on the table.
It's a starting point.
It's a great starting point.
Yes, for sure. An absolutely great place to begin the process. It doesn't mean where you end up is the proposal, the idea that was originally put out, but by saying yes, you continue the process of examining whether that's the right idea or not. You might ultimately get to a no, but if you start at yes, you have the opportunity to find something that works.
Now getting to saying yes all the time is work, and it's not intuitive, and it is going to take some practice. I mean, we're just hardwired to look for the problems in things and to figure out, is this going to be too hard? Is this feasible? Are we going to be able to do this? But when you shut down the ideas from the very beginning, you never get a chance to explore whether or not it's a credible idea.
So for what we do, we're consultants. We work with clients, and clients often have their own ideas. They always have their own ideas, right? But they're working with us because either their currently situation isn't working the way they want, or they don't know how to move forward with these ideas. And so on the client services side, I have found a lot of times, even if the idea is wackadoodle, that if you immediately reply back with no, you shouldn't do this, and here's why, it stifles that conversation and process. Now, for me, because you were talking about training yourself, I've caught myself where I have trained myself to not immediately say no, even if I hate the idea.
Right.
But I also don't automatically say yes. I find myself a little self-introspection here that I will stop and ponder.
Yeah.
Okay, what are you really saying? Is it the actual idea like that is how it is, or can that idea be morphed or changed into something else, or can the conversation about this idea or this proposal lead to what you ultimately need it to be?
Right.
And for me, on the dealing with clients, there's 50% of the time they want us to validate their ideas,
right?
Because we're the outside expert, we're the third party, we're independent, and all that stuff. That's why they work with someone like that. But they also want us to give them ideas or drive things for them. That's why we pay you, right, to come up with these things.
Even if they don't ask us, that's our job. We're counselors, not order takers.
The best scenario is when the client has a basic idea, whether it's good or not, and like the saying yes, or definitely avoiding the no, and working them to where they need to be. Because at the back of my head, when they pitch a bad idea, I know where they should be instead of the bad idea.
Right.
If I just told them, tell them that's a bad idea, do this.
Right.
Well, that's a little bit of forcing it upon them. But if I can work through the process and they end up feeling the buy-in that we said earlier, and feeling like it is their original idea, even if the final execution has nothing to do with what they originally posed, but they're in the process and they have ownership of it, the likelihood of not only them actually putting it into play, but then supporting it and keeping it into play when we're not there to hold their hands and for it to be ultimately successful goes way up. So you're right that I trained myself to immediately not say no. Now I think I need to maybe train myself to immediately say yes.
Well, maybe not. That's a whole different conversation. Okay. From the standpoint of running an agency, sometimes you do need to say no. Sometimes you don't have the expertise. Maybe it's not a good fit. Maybe you don't have the resources. So sometimes, just taking on a job to have a roster of clients isn't always a good idea.
Now, that's true, and that's for sure, and that comes to if we're going to even work together or not, which is a different conversation than people we're already working with, because there's some expectations because we're in a working relationship.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think that finally the greatest advantage of saying yes is creating an environment where people adapt quickly. You have to be flexible to get to
Sure.
I mean, like that, when you say yes and you listen to the idea, you're being flexible.
And the process is more important than anything else.
Absolutely.
In this type of conversation, the process of bringing ideas to the table and not immediately being shot down, and working through decision making and putting all the elements of what is our business, what is our brand, who's our audience, all of those great questions you should always ask anytime you put a new idea on the table, and getting people ingrained in what's important in the decision-making process, not the boss said so, or the boss's ego, or the boss is smarter than anyone else, but does it fit the parameters of who we are as a company, who our audience is, and ultimately our position in our industry.
Yeah, and I think that requiring active listening, which is what you were talking about with your client, right? You gave me that, he or she gave me an idea. You avoid the temptation if you've got doubts, avoid the temptation to say yes. Eventually, but you're saying yes by listening to the idea.
You haven't stopped them.
You haven't stopped them.
Right.
And that active listening forces you to think quickly. It forces you to be flexible, because it reminds me of a time when I was still in the Navy. I had a subordinate command in Japan, and the guy talked forever. No phone call with him ever went less than an hour. And I was the junior person in the office, the number 2. But my boss couldn't stand this guy, so I got the calls, right?
Right.
And it was hard to listen to the rants. I mean, but always there was one kernel of an idea in there that made sense that we could move with.
The reason for the call was still valid. Just what discussed on the call, maybe not so much. Right?
Maybe the reason for the call wasn't even right, but there was a kernel of a good idea in there. Almost always, I'd say maybe once or twice there wasn't.
Now, here's another tip I want everyone to hear, because one of the reasons I am quick to not say no, but sort of try to continue the conversation, whether it's a yes or no, is often when someone has an idea, and like you said, sometimes you hear the idea and you go, "This is terrible. This is never going to work.
It's not going to work,
right?" Because we've been there, done that. I know you're not going to get rich overnight. All the SEO won't fix all your problems. All that good stuff, right?
Right.
But sometimes asking that person to elaborate on and explain the idea, you can literally, just by giving them that open space to talk through it. I don't have to say anything, because at the end of a sentence or two or an hour of the conversation, they literally go, maybe that's not a good idea.
That doesn't sound good.
Having them talk themselves out of it, as opposed to an immediate no from me, again, goes back to that same conversation about buy-in, or it wasn't because the consultant told us no, it's because the consultant showed us why it wasn't a good idea.
Right.
And they still come back to, I loved my idea, but now I realize why it's not a good idea.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have gotten there if you hadn't had the capacity to say yes.
You wouldn't have the attitude of acceptance.
You wouldn't have the attitude, right. Exactly. So there we go. There's lots more. I mean, there are tons of books on the subject if you Google it, right? But I thought that this was an important nugget that has come up recently in a couple cases, and so I wanted to share.
I have a personal philosophy that I think dovetails into this perfectly, and I've talked about this on my personal podcast on the Saturday Morning Hustle several times, and so here it is. See if you can, because it's intentionally a little obtuse. See if you can follow along with this. Say no as much as possible so that you can say yes as much as possible.
Yes, and you've said that before on this and explained that very well.
So quickly, if you guys didn't catch it on this podcast previously, I say no. You talked about earlier about the right client fit and the right relationships and stuff. So there are a lot of opportunities in business. Most of them aren't right. And often
for you,
yes,
for that
correct.
Organization,
but often too many people feel like they're missing, like they're them leaving money on the table, right? You're missing an opportunity to not work with someone because it's billable hours and all that good stuff.
Right.
Well, we have learned through 10 years of the Golden Group that just because you can make a couple of bucks off of it doesn't mean there's real value to it or a good relationship or something that's going to move you forward and be ultimately beneficial for the client too.
Right.
So,
and we've had those jobs that are time sucks.
Yes. Or those clients, and it goes back to your gut. Your gut's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Well, it's good money. Take the money, and at the end of it, you spent 10 times the hours and manpower and frustration, and had to have an extra, shot at the end of the night to steady yourself, or extra cup of coffee in the morning, and it ends up the value is really low on whatever you made on it, right?
And it was frustrating for everybody,
exactly.
Client
and then the work product, was it something that were proud enough to go out and go to the next client and go, look, we did this for them, we could do this for you, because there was so much of that back and forth tension.
So saying no to those fits,
wrong opportunities.
Right.
If it's 90% right, you should still say no. That's how we look at how we deal with clients, new potential clients and projects and things of that nature. Now, the flip side is what that does for us is it does allow us the freedom to do all kinds of other things with that time and energy that are actually not direct sales, but are audience development. And that is by doing pro bono work, by doing things in the community, by networking, by showing up at things like OVF and Startup Grind and 1 Million Cups, and not just networking and trying to sell our services, but meet other people in our business ecosphere and support other people, give advice. Once or twice a month, I have a phone call or an email exchange with someone who is not a client and they've never become a client who asked me advice. Just recently, I had someone call me on a Saturday night. Literally was going to dinner with my wife, and he was a friend of a friend. He was a friend of a client who's also a friend, and was in a panic. He had a crisis management situation going on. He had a social media dust up that he didn't know how to handle, and he was afraid it was really going to get bad for his business.
Right.
And I took this phone call, and my wife went into the restaurant and got our table while I sat and chatted with him. Told him it wasn't something that needed to be done right that moment, but I would take some time on Sunday, and on Monday I would send him some notes.
Right.
And I did. I sent him about 4,000 words.
Wow.
And a note, because I could go on a roll, right?
Right.
I'm not sure what he did with it, because he went on. He took the advice. I didn't give him the advice he was looking for. I gave him the right advice. Point being, he's not a client. He didn't pay me for it. But my friend, who's also a client, who referred him, was very grateful for me to take the time, and I said yes to it. And I put something positive out into the world. Who knows if it'll come back or not, but being able to do those things. Now I think I'm going to go back to that note and make a blog post, or maybe do a podcast episode out of that. I've got a presentation coming up next month with the BBB, I think, and it's about reputation. I know I'm going to reference the fact that I got this call and this was happening.
Right.
Because ultimately my advice to him was to do nothing.
Right.
Right.
Sometimes that's the right option.
That's the right advice. But also, there are several college classes. I come and talk to your class. I come and talk to the PRSA kids. I've talked to several entrepreneur classes. We do things like this so that we can create a myriad of opportunities by saying yes to everything. Will you come speak? Will you be a part of a and now it's even better with Zoom calls and everything.
Right,
like I can just jump on a Zoom call. I don't have to drive all the way to Norman or to Chickasha. The USSA was the last entrepreneur group I talked to. Talked to him for over an hour via Zoom. I didn't have to drive 45 minutes down there, spend an hour, and then drive 45 minutes back, all that good stuff. Being on other people's podcasts. People ask me to be on their podcast all the time, whether it's because of this podcast or Starting Morning Hustle. I say yes as much as possible, because you just never know who's going to hear it, the connections that you can make, the audience expansion that you can have, etc. So saying yes to things that are conducive to what you do only can happen if you said no to all of the things that are non-conducive to what you do. Yep. And that's one of the failures people make, especially when they have a very new business, and it depends on your business, of course. Obviously, if you're in retail or if you're in food or something like that, like everyone who walks through the door is a potential client. That's fine. Right. But you also have to consider, are you a luxury brand, or are you high end, or are you low cost provider? What's your business model? Who's your audience? And are you attracting the right audience? And that's where people fail in their marketing. Is they try to attract everyone, right? We've said, how many times have we said that everyone is not your client? You need to specialize. We're going through the process right now with a new client, right, who's a food product, and he would like everyone to drink his coffee, and we are like, here's the audience most likely to drink your coffee. Right. He needs to say no to everyone who's not exactly right, and if they find it and if they buy it, that's fantastic. That's the yes. So you're right in that yes continues the process, and for me, yes continues the process to expand our reach and meet new people and create opportunities that way, because I do say no very specifically to situations that are very non-conducive for what we're doing. Sure. But we have that luxury. Sure. We've been doing this together as the Golden Group for 10 years. We've been doing this in general forever. Right. I'm going to date myself there. Yeah. So we have that ability where young businesses or people early in their career may not understand the give and take of the yes and no scenario. Right.
Well, and then to bring it home, it's especially important internally with your employees, and I don't care if you've only got one other employee, to say yes, and an intern, to say yes so that you can get good ideas on the table and move the business forward. That's the bottom line. That's what I want to leave folks with.
That's the nugget. Right there, folks. That is the nugget. The process, the continuation of the process, and the potential is more important than the speed of saying no and moving on. Right. Because I do find people who are real quick to say no, they feel like they're being ready to fight, decisive.
Right.
They feel they're being very decisive because that creates efficiency. Yes and no. It creates efficiency in the day, in the moment, in that 10-second period, but it doesn't allow the process to develop potentially really good, great ideas off of saying yes and continuing the conversation.
And
the motivation of the employees as well.
That's exactly right. That's the most important point there, I think, and that is the
I
no
agree.
was a slap down, and you're not going to get slapped down many times before you stop.
Most people will, and again, it goes back to, and the younger someone is, or the less experienced in their industry they are, or the dynamics with your boss or your boss's boss can stifle that idea process, which then you miss out on opportunity.
Right. Exactly. So there you go, straight from the NeoMarketing podcast,
like it.
The Power of Yes.
Very good, Professor.
So mush that subscribe button, hit that update button.
say
Give us-
yes. Say yes to the NeoMarketing
say
podcast.
yes, and send us your comments. Until next time, ciao.
Good luck.
This has been the Golden Group NeoMarketing Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Tell a friend, leave a review, and engage with us on social media. Thanks for listening.